Hello and welcome back to the OTB channel. Now, Linux distros have come on massively over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's hard to keep up with all the bells and whistles and features. So have you ever quite fancied going back to a much simpler system which leaves you completely in control? Well, perhaps Slackware is for you. Let's have a look after the intro. Okay, welcome back. Yeah, so today the channel's going old school, and there are a couple of reasons for this. One of the main ones was I mentioned Slackware on my last video, that on my X260 ThinkPad I've currently got Slackware stable installed, and I think all the way since 2005 I've had a copy of Slackware on a partition somewhere. So I'm a fan, and with working on my workstation most of the time in Debian or in Arch, it's easy to forget that the solidity and stability that I've had for all of these 15 years or so has always been there when I've booted up a laptop and I have a Slackware system there. In fact, it started me thinking that I've been quite neglectful because I hadn't even booted into my Slackware system for a while, and I don't really know why not. And with what I talked about the other day, me expecting this new ThinkPad X220 to come along, I thought, do you know, I'm looking at Arch, I'm looking at all these different systems, but an X220 ThinkPad is all about simplicity, so why don't I just put my Slackware on there? I don't want to break the pattern of having Slackware installed somewhere at all points. And I also had a few requests from various people saying they'd love to see a Slackware install. So, great. So I'm going to run through that very quickly today. Let me just put a few caveats here. Slackware is not for everyone. If you want a system where you do a quick next install, and then you've got an up and running system with very little to do and you can just get on with your job, Slackware probably isn't for you. That's not to say it's difficult to install, because it isn't. But if you want all the bells and whistles once you've installed, all the nice themes and the extra bits and pieces, well, you're going to have to put them in the system. Slackware follows a philosophy where it keeps things as simple as possible. The applications and packages that you get on Slackware are pretty much as the developer intended. If you want to customize them, you want to theme them, well, that's great. That's up to yourself. So you do need to put a little bit of work into it. Having said that, once you've put the work into it, and it doesn't take many hours to set it up, you will have a rock-solid, stable system. And it will do anything that any other distro out there will do. In terms of stability, it's hard to think of a distro that's more stable. In fact, its development cycle recently has made Debian look like Speedy Gonzales. The last stable release was 14.2, which was released in July 2016, and we're all waiting for the next stable release. And we think that's going to be called version 15, but nobody knows for sure. When will that be coming? Well, nobody knows. The project Slackware is headed up by a benevolent dictator for life. I'm always going to get his name wrong, the pronunciation. Patrick Volkerding, or Pat as he's known, who created the distro in 1993. So it's the oldest surviving Linux distribution that is still under active development. And Pat decides when a new release comes out, and he'll let us know when it's ready. So he won't make any predictions. And many people have asked, well, why hasn't Slackware got this in it or that in it? Or, for an example, why hasn't it already got PAM in it? Why hasn't it got systemd in it? Why hasn't it got this, that, and the other? Well, the simple answer is because Pat's seen no reason to add various things. He seems to follow the philosophy of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. In fact, just to show you how conservative Slackware is, PAM has only just entered testing now on the current release. So this is many years after PAM was introduced in the vast majority of distributions. Systemd, it's not even on the horizon. It still uses a very simple to use systemv-like init system, which is controlled just by editing text files. Really easy to learn. So, what do you need to know about Slackware? Let's talk about some of the downsides, or what people see as downsides. One, it's often said that Slackware has no package manager. It does have a package manager. It absolutely does have a package manager, including Slack package, which allows you to install packages from online repositories. What it doesn't do is resolve dependencies. All of the packages in the official repositories all work together. All of the dependencies are resolved. But if you want to go outside of the Slackware official repositories, well, it's basically up to you. Pat takes the view that you need to understand exactly what you're installing when you install packages from outside the official tree. And therefore, you're making the decision about what to install in terms of the package itself and any dependencies that that package relies on. Which is fair enough, but can be quite frightening to start off with. It's less of a problem, though, than you might think. There are a whole range of, I suppose you'd call them helpers, that go a long way towards helping you resolve this dependency issue. You can add a plugin to Slack package called Slack Package Plus, which allows you to add additional repositories, so you can install the likes of the latest KDE, Mate, Cinnamon. There is also a very easy way to add true multi-lib functionality, thanks largely to the work of one of the guys who's heavily involved in Slackware, called Eric Hammerliers, known as Alien Bob on the forums. And generally speaking, you have thousands of packages that potentially you could install from the Slackbuilds repository, which is a third-party repository, and there are tools that you can install that allow you to work with that Slackbuilds repository. Personally, I use something called SBO Tools, and I use Slack Package Plus, the plugin for Slackware's native Slack package, and I've never had any issues at all. Now, if you want to know about all the ins and outs of these things, back in the day when I first started this channel, last July, August, when I had less than 50 subscribers, I did a series of videos on the Slackware Live installation. And I showed people how to use SBO package and how to use the Slack Package Plus repo and how to even install Flatpaks on Slackware. So rather than repeating myself here, by all means go back and have a look at my previous videos. The Slackware Live CDs, though, are something of a snapshot. They are not the full Slackware installation. They are there so that people can see potentially what Slackware can be when you have various different packages installed and how it works. You can install Slackware live to disk, but the official way of installing Slackware is to download and install the full DVD, everything. And for Slackware Current, which is the development branch, you're looking at about 3.5 gigs. Now, there's a reason for installing everything, and it comes back down to that issue of Slackware not automatically resolving dependencies. That problem is going to be much less for you if you install the full Slackware build, because that minimizes the chances of you not having libraries that you need when you go over to the Slackbuilds website to install whatever. So let's just go across to the Slackware page website and have a quick look. So here's the web page of Slackware, the Slackware project, slackware.com. I know, straight out of the 1990s, but again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It does the job. And you can see here that Pat is advertising the last stable release, which was 14.2, that was released on the 1st of July 2016. Now, there's two distributions really within Slackware, although a distribution probably isn't the correct term for the second one that I'm going to mention. There's 14.2, which is the stable release, but there is also a development branch which people call Current. And many people these days use Current simply because, well, it's brand new. It's what will eventually become Slackware 15. And in essence, it's a little bit like a rolling release. So if you do full upgrades constantly every day, the chances are you're going to break it. You don't have to, though. Unlike most distros, Slackware is not going to impose updates on you. And in fact, you can install Current and just install the security updates that come down. Nothing else. Not all of the additional upgraded packages. So you can run Current in a very stable way. How do you go about getting Slackware? Well, there's a Slackware torrents page, or there's a whole range of mirrors. And I'm unashamedly here going to give a little bit of a heads up to a good friend of mine, Darren, who actually started me using Slackware in the first place all those years ago. He manages the Slackware UK mirror, largely funded by himself, although with a little bit of sponsorship. And this is a pretty fast mirror, and it's kept up to date. Darren is also the head of the Coventry Linux user group as well, so he's active in the community. Just as a very quick punt, he asked me to point out, I had a chat with him the other day, that he's just started a Patreon page. So if you enjoy everything, you enjoy using Slackware and you use his mirror, take a look, support him. I'm just looking at what he does, a £5 a month, where basically you'll get updates and advanced notification of downtime and a pint of beer or cup of coffee should you have the opportunity to meet him. Okay. At the £10 a month, a Slackware UK supporter IRC hostname cloak on the Freenode IRC network. I'm not entirely sure what that means. And if you go for the 15, you can have an email address, your name at slackware.uk, and a t-shirt after 1 year of support. Okay, all good. So if you want to support the Slackware UK mirror, please do so. More to the point, though, let's go down to the mirror repos. There's a folder called Slackware ISO. You don't need to go into 14.2. If you go into Slackware ISO, click on Slackware 14.2, you can see that there is a DVD ISO there. It's 2.6 gigs. If you want to run current, well, officially, Slackware do not produce a current ISO. The way to run current is to generally install the stable build and then do an in-place upgrade. Alien Bob, though, produces updated current ISOs. So on this repo, if you go to People and you click on Alien's current ISO, you'll see there that the current ISO is there for Slackware 64. And if I go into that, and that's actually 3.1 gigs. That's what I'm going to use for this demonstration. So, enough said, let's install Slackware. Okay, so you can see VirtualBox in front of you. I've got Slackware set up to boot in UEFI mode. So hit start and let's see what happens. And let me see if I can make that bigger. Okay, there you go. So it started in UEFI mode, and we want the first entry to take us to the Slackware 15 huge kernel. So if you were expecting a graphical interface here, sorry, that's not what you get with Slackware. You get your two little penguins above there, and then suddenly we've booted. That's it. And you just follow along. If you're not using a US keyboard, load a different one. Enter 1 to select a keyboard map. So I'm going to type 1 and click enter. Then I'm going to go to the second option there, which is QWERTY UK. And I now have the opportunity to test. Well, there's a few characters that I can always tell if it's working. There's the pipe symbol, there's the @ symbol, and there's the double quote symbol. They're all working. Okay, so all good. So now I just enter 1 on a line and accept. Right, so Slackware is simple to install, but it's not going to do things for you. It doesn't have an automatic mode. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to partition your disks. Before you do that, you need to log in, and you simply log in as root. Now, how you partition your disks is completely up to you. I use cfdisk. But first, you're going to want to know what your disk is called, SDA, HDA, NV, whatever. So let me just do an fdisk -L. Okay, and what's it telling me here? Right, so dev SDA, 32 gig. Great. By the way, if you have NVMe drives, don't even attempt to install Slackware Stable. It will be supported in Slackware Current, so you'll need to use that. So we know what our disk is, so I'm just going to hit cfdisk space dev SDA. There we go. Select our label type. Well, as this is a UEFI system, I'm going to go for GPT rather than DOS. And I get this very simple interface up. I'm going to start by creating my ESP partition. So I'm going to hit new. What size do I want? Right, I'm going to create a 500 meg, so 500M partition. And I want to mark that as an ESP partition. So I'll move across to type. And I will move up to try and find that. Where are we? EFI system. Right, so that's marked as the EFI system. I'll now create a swap partition. Nothing huge, let's say 4 gig. So 4G. And I will mark that again. I'll go to type. And I'll mark it as Linux swap. The rest of the free space I'm going to set up as an ext4 partition, and I'll stick with the 27.5 gigs, which is the rest of it. The type, Linux file system. Simple as that. Do I have the option to actually set that as, or set a boot flag? No, I don't. No problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to write that to the disk. and create the partition table. So I'm going to hit right and I'm going to type yes. Okay, the partition table has been altered. I now need to take note of what I've just done. SDA1, the EFI system, SDA2, the swap, SDA3, the ext4 system. Great. So let's quit CF disk. I just type setup now. And it will take me through the install. I don't need to look at help. I've just set up my key map. So I'll just go down to the next one. Set up your swap partitions. It's already spotted it's SDA2. So I'll just click OK. Your Slackware Setup will now prepare your system swap space. When formatting swap partitions with make swap, you can also check them for bad blocks. This is not the default since nearly all modern hard drives check themselves for bad blocks anyway. Okay, would I like to check for bad blocks? No, I don't think that's necessary. Okay, so my swap space has been configured. Hit OK. I now need to select a partition from the following list, SDA3, to set up my root partition. So I'm going to select that. I'll do a quick format. I'm going to pick ext4, but you do have a whole range of different options there. It's adding that to fstab. An EFI partition was found on dev SDA1, but it's not yet been formatted. Would you like to format it? Yes, please. And you can already see that it's set it up as a VFAT partition and it's created the directory boot/EFI to mount it on. So, okay. So that's nice and easy. So don't panic when you see no automatic option to set up your partitions. It's a really straightforward process. So now we go to the install itself, and where do we want to draw the packages from? Well, it's the first option we need, install from a Slackware CD or DVD as we're using the ISO. And we can just scan for that. And it's found it. We then have an option of what to install. Now, by default, most options are chosen apart from international language support for KDE. Well, we don't actually need any of that. So I'm just going to scroll down to see if everything else is done. Yeah, everything else is pretty much installed. It doesn't have the source. Oh yeah, Linux kernel source is there already. I'm going to keep everything checked. If you don't want something, all you have to do is highlight it and hit the space bar to uncheck it. But I would recommend, if you're installing Slackware, install everything. It just makes your life so much easier when you get to the end of the process. So click OK. So what do we want to do? Do we want to install everything, which is 9 gigs plus of software, which is recommended? Or do we want to choose more fine-grained ways of doing things? I'm just going to go for the recommended install and do full everything. And it's now in this ncases interface just going to do its stuff. So I'll speed this up and we'll come back once it's finished. Right, so we're all finished. I may cut that short because it took a little while. Not a huge amount of time, perhaps 10 minutes or so. And we suddenly get to this next bit. Do we want to make a USB boot disk? I'm going to skip that. So this is the next thing that asks for our interaction. Do we want to install Lilo and proceed, or do we want to skip installing Lilo and proceed to ELilo, or do we want to install Lilo anyway? Well, standard Lilo is for a system installed in BIOS mode, so we want to skip it, and we'll proceed to the ELilo installation, although we're not actually going to do that. Because now we get to the next screen, it's given us the option install ELilo or do not install ELilo. I'm not going to install ELilo. Do we want to load GPM, which allows us to cut and paste on the virtual console? Well, do you know what? Yes. Would you like to configure your network? Let's just say yes. Give us a host name. Okay, OTB Slack. How about that? Call it whatever you want. Enter a domain name for OTB Slack. Well, we'll just go for example.com. You can put anything in there. It doesn't really matter. And how do we want to configure our network? Do we want a static IP, DHCP, set up a loopback connection, or are we going to use Network Manager? We're going to use Network Manager, so I'm going to stick on this last option, and I'll click OK. So your system's now configured to use Network Manager. Just click yes. Right, now we're on a page that takes us through what services do we want to start up. Completely up to yourself. We already have the likes of cron set up, and we have Fuse set up, and message bus, and syslog, and SSH. Do we want anything else at this stage? These are easy enough to configure, by the way, in the system. It's just a case of making a text file executable by doing a chmod + x. Let's just go with that. Okay. Would you like to try out some custom screen fonts? No at this stage. Hardware clock is set to local time. Yeah, I'll go with that. Let's set our locale. So let's go down to Europe. We'll be there in a minute. You realise just how many places there are in the world, starting with A. Right, Europe, London. That's us. And what do we want to do? Choose our default Vi editor. Well, I've been playing with Vim, so let's go for Vim. I believe by default it's normally set at Elvis, which is the traditional VI support. So Vim. And which desktop do we automatically want to start when we first go into the system? And we have an option here. Your two main ones are KDE or XFCE, but you can choose Fluxbox or Blackbox or Window Maker or FVWM2 or TWM. I think I'm going to pick XFCE to start off with. Okay, so there's currently no root password set. Would you like to do so? Yes, please. And type in a root password. And re-enter it. Press enter to continue. System configuration and installation is complete. You may now reboot your system. We don't want to do that. If we reboot our system, we're not going to be able to get back into it because we haven't installed the Lilo bootloader. So I'm just going to go all the way down to exit. Please remove the installation disk. Okay. Would you like to reboot the system? No, thank you. So we've been dropped down to a root terminal, and the first thing that we need to do is we need to install the bootloader, which in my case is going to be Grub. So from this text console, the first thing I'm going to type is mount, which will let me know what has been mounted so far. And I know it's very small, but it's telling me everything is mounted on the mnt directory mount. So what I'm going to do from here, I'm going to chroot into mount. So chroot /mnt, and I want it to start bin bash once it's chrooted. So chroot /mnt /bin bash. Okay, so we're chrooted into the installed system now. The next thing I want to do is I want to source etc profile. So I just type source etc profile. Okay, all good. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to install Grub. Grub is actually on the installation. It's just not been installed. I will put all these commands along with links to the various web pages and sites where you can find help in the video description below. So all I'm going to do on this is I'm going to type grub install, grub-install. I'm sorry I can't make this any bigger at the moment. --target equals x86 _ 64 -EFI space --EFI-directory equals, well, we know where it's created that. It's boot /EFI bootloader-id equals grub. So once you've done that, check and have a look at what the command is. You will find these exact same commands, by the way, on the Arch Wiki, but I will copy and paste these into the video description. So I'm just checking. So we've got grub-install space --target equals x86 64 -EFI space --EFI-directory equals boot /EFI space and then bootloader-id equals grub. Right, fingers crossed, I'm going to hit enter. Installation finished, no error reported. Brilliant. We now have to update grub. So it's the standard command that we use here, grub-mkconfig -o, and we want to do that in boot grub /grub.cfg. So let me just read that out to you. So it's grub-mkconfig -o space boot grub-cfg. Hit enter, and it's generating the configuration file. And it's found a couple of instances there. It's found a generic kernel, and it's also found the huge kernel. The huge kernel is going to work every time. It's got every single module just baked in. You may want to swap to the generic kernel as you get used to the system, but you will need to create your init RAM image if you do that, and the Slackware page will show you how to do that. Okay, so that's Grub installed. Now, one more thing, and this is really for VirtualBox more than anything else, but it doesn't hurt to do it on other systems. You know that VirtualBox has a very iffy EFI installation. So what we're going to do, we're going to copy our copy of Grub, essentially, over to a different directory. So I'm going to type make directory -p. The -p, by the way, just means create any intermediate directories along the way. And the directory I'm going to create is boot EFI, capital EFI, and a directory called boot. So boot, EFI, capital EFI, and boot. Now I'm going to copy the grub bootloader into that directory. So cp /boot /EFI /capital EFI, and it's currently in grub, and it's called grub.x64.efi. I want to copy that into boot, EFI, capital EFI, and into that boot directory we've just created, and I'm going to call it boot x64.efi. All good. So now I'm going to reboot the system. And there we have our little penguins, and it's booting fine. Okay. Do you know, as the years have gone, I used to like all these boot splashes and Plymouth themes and everything else. I've got to quite like the text console now. Okay, so OTB Slack login. Well, we've only got one login at the moment, and that's for root. The first thing we want to do, however, is create a normal user. We do not want to be using root. So now I've logged in as root, I'm just going to type add user. Login name for new user. Well, let's say OTB. User ID, well, we'll just do default. Press enter to continue without adding any additional groups, or press the up arrow to add additional groups. I'm pressing the up arrow there, and you can see which groups we're going to be added to by default. I also want to add us to the wheel group. Okay. Home directory OTB, yes please. Shell bin bash, yes please. Expiry date, just leave it as default. Right, this is it. If you want to bail out, hit Control-C, otherwise press enter. Okay, full name, OTB. And we'll leave all the rest just blank for the time being. And we're now asked to create a password. And to repeat. Right, so that's our user setup. All good. What else might we want to do at this stage while we're still in root? Well, we might want to set up sudo. So let's just type vi sudo, and this opens up the sudo as file. So let me just scroll down here. Right, uncomment to allow members of group wheel to execute any command. This is the reason I've just added us to the wheel group. So I'm just going to hit X, and I'm going to do colon. I'm going to do WQ to write and then quit. So that's it. We've now set up sudo. We've set our own root, user. So I'm going to exit from root, and I'm going to log in as OTB with the password that I've just created. And we have OTB at OTB Slack. So you might have expected here to see a display manager coming up. That is not what happens by default. We have set up XFCE to start up, but in order to start it, this is very traditional, we simply type startx. What do we want to do? We want to use the default config for XFCE. Obviously, the VirtualBox guest editions aren't included here. You might not like just running startx. You might want something like KDM to start, and that's fine. Let's do an SU, and let's go to root. The thing to do is to modify a text file called etc init tab. So I'm going to do that with vim now, etc init tab, and you will see here that we have the default run level set to 3. What that means is every time you boot, you are going to boot into a text console and you'll need to type start X to get into your system. I quite like that. But if you would prefer, well, that's fine as well. Change 3 to 4. As simple as that. And you will see, if we go down this script, that what it does is it will launch any display managers that are on the system in a certain order. GDM comes first, but GDM isn't actually installed on this system, so it's going to install KDM, or it's going to launch KDM, and if that isn't there, XDM. And okay, that's all we have to do. So let me just do a colon, write and quit, and let's just exit, and I'll reboot, and we'll come back to what I hope is KDM launching. And here we are. From here, you may want to set yourself to your XFCE session and type in your username plus your login password. And here we have XFCE. That is the basic setup. So that's Slackware. Once you've got it to that stage, it's up to you. Easy to install, and you can set it up with Grub right from the get-go. It works on EFI systems. What I will do in the video description, I'll also include the install Grub commands for a non-EFI system. It's essentially the same, just minor differences. So, hope you enjoyed that. Please don't forget to join me on Library, and also don't forget we do have a Facebook group which is starting to grow, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. So thanks for watching a bit of an old school video, and we'll revert to normal on the next vid. Thanks very much, hope you enjoyed this.